Welcome everyone to this presentation on e-commerce in Europe. PostNord has made an annual report since 2014 called E-commerce in Europe, and we make that report in collaboration with Direct Link, which is a PostNord subsidiary specializing in global e-commerce deliveries and helping companies establish themselves on new markets. I think it goes without saying almost that a lot has happened during the last 7 years with e-commerce in Europe, and more in some markets than in others, depending on their maturity 7 years ago. But all of these markets that we're monitoring have developed tremendously during the last 7 years. We'll start just looking at one graph showing on the left-hand side here the shares of the different populations back in 2014 who in our consumer survey answered that they had shopped online at least once during the last year. And as you can see, in France, 72% of the population had shopped online during the last 12 months. In the UK, 81%. In Germany, also 81%. In Spain, 60%. And in Italy, 45%. So this is the share of the population back in 2014 who had shopped at least once during the last 12 months. On the right-hand side, you see the shares of the different population this year in 2020 who answered that they shop at least once per month. And as you can see here, it's quite remarkable, the development. So in France, 72% of the population now answer that they shop at least once every month or more often, which is the same percentage who had shopped once during the last 12 months in 2014. Similarly, in the UK and in Germany, the same share of the population now shop at least once every month. Even more remarkably, in Spain, you have now 78%, so almost as big a share of the population as in the UK, who shop online on average at least once every month, compared to 60% who had shopped during the last year back in 2014. In Italy, even more aggressive development of e-commerce. 83% now answer. So the most mature market in terms of the share of the population who shop at least once every month, compared to 45% 7 years ago who had shopped once or more often during the last 12 months. So that's just to illustrate how much these markets have developed during the last 7 years. Now, if you look at the frequency with which consumers shop online between the different markets, on this second graph, you see the different lines representing the distribution of frequency amongst the consumers for different markets. And here we've clustered some of the markets because we don't want to have one line for every market. So we've clustered some of the markets that look very similarly. So the highest average frequency per consumer is in Italy, the UK, and in Germany, where you have the highest share of the population shopping 2 to 3 times per month. And in the second highest frequency on the line with Sweden and France, you have it's somewhat moved to the right, so you have a lower average frequency. And then you have Denmark and Norway. So in Norway, you have a much lower average frequency of online shopping than you have in Italy, the UK, and Germany. In fact, if you take the average number of times consumers shop online in a year, it's about half the number in Norway compared to Italy, UK, and Germany. And as I said before, when the report is out, you'll be able to see these details for all of the different countries. There are also some remarkable differences on the average spend per year and consumer in the different markets. So if we move on to the next graph, here you can see in the top you have Germany, Spain, and the UK, where the average consumer spends more than €1,000 per individual per annum. And in the bottom you have Belgium and Norway, where you have much lower amounts per consumer and year. And these amounts are adjusted to consumer prices in the markets, kind of Big Mac index adjusted. There are also some other fundamental differences between these markets, one of them being the presence of the big marketplaces like Amazon and eBay. So on the next graph, you can see on the x-axis the share of the population who had shopped on Amazon during the last year, and on the y-axis you have the share of the population who had shopped on eBay during the last year. So here you find some of the most mature e-commerce markets in the uppermost right corner, where Amazon is also very much present in the market, like UK, Germany and Italy. And then you have in the other cluster some of the less mature e-commerce markets like Norway, Denmark and Belgium. We can also see some substantial differences between the markets in terms of what consumers buy online with high frequency. So this table here shows the shares of the populations in the different markets who have, so the market penetration basically, the share of the population who had bought something in the different product categories during the last year. In the top line you have clothes and shoes for almost all markets, the exception being Sweden, where you have pharmacy items, pharmacy products being the category with the highest penetration in terms of how many consumers had bought something in the category during the last year, with 70% of the population, comparing to 17% in France. And here, of course, the online pharmacy market in Sweden is highly developed. Almost all of the big players have highly developed e-commerce platforms, whereas in France you have a completely different market structure for pharmacies, where many of the pharmacies are privately owned entities. Another interesting category is food, where in the top you have the UK, where 46% of the population had shopped food online during the last year, and in Norway it's only 18%, for instance. And then, of course, we also have to touch upon the topic of how the COVID pandemic has affected e-commerce in these different markets. And again, this is something you can read more about in the report, which will be out in a couple of weeks. One of the questions we asked this year, specifically related to the COVID pandemic, was whether the spread of the virus has resulted in consumers making a smaller share of their purchases online or a larger share. And this graph shows the share of the population answering that they bought a much larger or a somewhat larger fraction of their total consumption online. And that ranges from 19% in Denmark to 44% in Spain. So more than twice as many answered that they had shopped more online due to the pandemic in Spain compared to Denmark. Of course, this is closely related to the extent of the pandemic in the different countries at the time we conducted the survey back in May. Denmark at the time wasn't as severely hit, for instance, as Spain or Italy. We can also see that the types of products we buy more of on the internet because of Corona differs a lot from country to country. For most countries, it's clothes and shoes consumers have started buying more online as a consequence of the pandemic, whereas in the UK, Finland, France and Spain, most consumers have started buying food because of the pandemic. In Sweden, as the only country, most consumers have started buying pharmacy products online during the crisis. Okay, thank you for watching. The report will be out in a couple of weeks. There you can read more about all of these different things that I've covered briefly. And you can also download the last year's and prior year's reports there if you're curious. Thanks.